Here we go on the Hammer Factor, going into our celebrity guest. We have a maybe more of a legend than you, John Weld, on the line today.
Oh, I would say.
Yeah. We have the one and the only Corran Addison, who is gonna join us today. So let's see if we can get...
The first time I met Corran, we were building kayaks at Valley Mill. Lewis, did you ever apprentice there?
Yeah.
Did I relentlessly made fun of you for a summer or something like that? Was that how it went down?
It's not even. I mean, the first time you and I met was I was in middle school, and they had this thing where you could leave class and go apprentice somewhere for a week. And so I was, 13, I guess.
Yeah.
And every morning, I don't know if my mom was dropping me off on the side of the river road or something.
Yeah.
Weld went pick me up. We drive out to Valley Mill in the morning, listening to Howard Stern. And Weld would kind of just grill me during the commercial breaks, and it was like shut up, it's time to listen to Howard Stern.
We were out there building boats, and I used to build race boats, a place called Valley Mill Boats, composite race, slalom kayaks, some downriver boats. But it's a little boat shack out in the woods. It's me and Andy Bridge, who went on to work at Werner Paddles. But we would be out there listening to the hardest of hard heavy metal. It would be Slayer, a Slayer rock block going on, endlessly.
It was really very formative music years.
Yeah, and then we would switch over to Came Crimson. It would be a Came Crimson, hey Corey, I'm talking about when I first met you. This is John Weld.
Okay.
And so we're on this
phone. I don't know why my computer, I can see you guys, but it won't answer the call.
Well, can you hear us?
I can hear you on my phone.
Huh. Interesting.
But I can't,
That's
the
weird.
computer for some reason won't, I don't know why it won't answer the call.
Well, we made it happen. Thanks for coming on the Hammer Factor, Corran.
The Hammer Factor. Oh my goodness, am I going to get my ass handed to me?
No, it's going to be a lot of softball questions, for sure.
Well, as long as
What's your favorite river? That kind of thing. So anyway, we were building boats. It's probably 1991. Corran, I'll let you know if I need anything from you. We were building boats, and it was Andy Bridge and I, and Corran drives up, and he has this a flat bottomed race boat, and he's like, I'm going to let you guys mold this boat. And Andy started laughing, and since Andy's laughing, I started laughing too. I don't know what the hell is going on, but I was just going to do whatever Andy was doing. But it was a planing hull race kayak, right? And Corran's like, I'm going to let you mold this thing for this amount of money. And Andy started laughing even harder. And then he's like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever seen, right? What do you mean? This is the future of the sport, right? And he's like, it's not the future of the sport. I'm like, it's not the future of the sport. That's what Andy said. But it turns out it was the future of the sport. Who would have guessed? Do you remember that at all, Corran?
I don't remember saying that, but I do remember showing up with the planing hull slalom boat. I forget what I called it, but
I remember that boat. That was the Intense, right?
No. The Intense was what I raced at the Olympics. This is this is after I had started doing planing hulls, but I hadn't brought it in the market. So the Intense, I'd already been messing around for 3 or 4 years with planing hull boats, but I hadn't really got them to work properly, and they were chunky, clunky feeling doors. They were kind of like a Preon Alien, unpleasant to paddle. So the Intense was still a round-bottomed boat, standard sort of slalom. It had more rocker, and it had more rocker. So hang on, UPS is here. I'm sorry. Straight X. 1 second, guys. I'm sorry. Bonjour. We're going to do this in French. Yeah. There you go. Thank you, sir. Oh, look.
Well, you should finish your story about Valley Mill boats.
That's for another episode.
The Intense was a little bit like the boats are today, except it was 4 meters. But it had really cutaway stern, and it had more bow volume, more bow rocker than slalom boats did at the time. But it was nothing breakthrough. The boat you're talking about, it was probably a couple of years later I forget what I called it. It was white, if I remember correctly. But and I'd been working on it with Jason Beeks.
Huh. Yeah, I guess I kind of remember that.
Yeah,
but
Jason he was living in Asheville or something at the time, and we would go down to the Savage Factory and work on the boats, and then make a one-off of the thing and go out and paddle it. And I forget who Jason's coach was at the time. At the time, I still had aspirations of competing in '96. So we were working on this thing, and yeah.
But there was nothing. I mean, it was nothing like that. I mean, at least as far as there was every boat out there. Look, it was a displacement hull. Right. I'd never seen a whitewater boat with a planing hull at that point. I mean,
I had the Fury. I had the Fury prototypes already before then, and that's obviously where we got the idea from. Is we were taking the Fury out onto waves and spinning like a top, and I was thinking, man, you could really. Some of the direct moves, I mean, now they're doing all those moves direct because the boats are so small, you can just whip it around on nothing. But, at 4 meters long, and we still had more volume in slalom boats back then. And I was thinking some of these moves that you do, even if it's one move per course, that you can go direct because you can get on a wave and just flat spin it so that by the time you get to where you've got to do the move, you're already facing downstream.
So
you're where I was coming from.
Your inspiration for this was a surfboard or something like that, right? Or what was your design inspiration? Boogie board.
Boogie boards. I was down at the beach. I was out there. I forget what boat it was. I think it was in a Donso or something like that. This is like mid '80s, and these guys were on boogie boards catching waves, and they were doing all these flat spins on the wave. Because surfers don't do that because they got fins. Well, they didn't back then. They do now, but they didn't do spins like that back then. But the boogie boarders were spinning like a top down the wave, and I was like, man, wouldn't it be awesome to be able to do that in a boat?
And was this when you were working for Perception? You'd work for Masters?
No, this is long before that. This is Perception. I started working there in '87, so this was probably '86.
So we should back up a bit because you have a long and storied career in this sport. So briefly, where you started, obviously South Africa, paddling. Like how'd you get in the sport, and what brought you here to the U.S.?
Oh, goodness. How I got in the sport is almost embarrassing. My father saw Deliverance, and he thought it would be a great idea to go.
Yeah. That's actually not that uncommon.
Apparently so. But he wanted to go canoeing, and we were in South Africa, and he couldn't find a canoe. Couldn't find one. And the local university had this mold down in like in a shed for some slalom boat from like 1972 Olympics or something like that. And he decided, well, he couldn't find a canoe, so he was going to build a kayak. So he borrowed this mold and he brought it home, and I think he took a saw to it and he started cutting it up. And I was probably 5 or something at the time. So my introduction to paddling was also my introduction to design. There was no concept of buying a boat.
Right.
Or getting something that existed. If you wanted to go kayaking, first you had to design a boat. And then you had to build a boat. And you had to invent the spray skirt, which that only came several years later. And you had to, design a life jacket. That also only came several. And helmets. But so it's probably about 75, 76 is when I was introduced to paddling by my father, and I was introduced to designing at the exact same moment. The two literally are inseparable for me. You can't do one without the other. I never have.
Yeah, when I started paddling, in the late 70s, but, there would be like a Letman Mark V mold, floating around, and it'd land somewhere close to you, and everyone would go over there and build a boat. And Walbridge was making skirts and life jackets back then, so you get a Walbridge kit. But there's definitely an idea that it was a homegrown, do-it-yourself sport. It wasn't something that involved the retail market at all, Yeah,
well, not in the States anyway. In Europe, it was pretty established. You had Lippe, you had Bavaria Boat, you had Letman, Prion, and then in England you had they became Piranha, but before then they were called. Anyway, it doesn't matter. In Europe, it was pretty established already. There were manufacturers, but in the U.S., Perception I think started in about '76, making composite boats, or maybe 74. And of course, you had the hollow form that was around, and you had that was in plastic, and you had the River Chaser from Quebec, also in plastic.
Oh yeah.
In 72. But you had to be a brave man to paddle those things. You know, it was so dangerous.
Yeah. So what brought you to the U.S.? How'd you end up here?
Well, I moved from South Africa to Europe in 1986. No, 1984. So this is right before I got my call-up papers. In South Africa, military service was mandatory. It was during the apartheid years. There was civil war going on, and the last thing I wanted to do was end up in the white man's army shooting black people because they were black. So as long as you left before you got your call-up papers, you were not AWOL. If you left after you got your call-up papers, they're going to come after you. So I got out of there when I was about 15, and I went to Europe. My mother moved to Europe because she had 3 sons, so all 3 of us were in the same position. And we left with her so that we could avoid military service in South Africa. And then in 87, I designed a boat at home, built a thing at home, and I decided that I was going to be the next designer for Perception Kayaks. And I sent Bill Masters at Perception a letter with some photos of the boat and told him that I wanted to come see him and sell him my design. And he said, well, get on a plane, come over here. So I came across, and he was getting his ass handed to him by the Vladimir Vaha's. He had the jetties, and he was working the Air Aquatic, the AQ.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
And my boat, kind of short and flat and rounded, it became the Corsica, my boat.
Right.
And he said, well, look, we need some new blood in here. Do you want a job? And I was completely, to me, Perception was like God. You know? It was this thing on the other side of the ocean that did these amazing things. And I would get the Perception catalog in South Africa, which you couldn't get anything from the U.S. in South Africa. But I would have a friend who would go to the States, and I would make sure anybody going to the States would pick up anything Perception for me, and a sticker or a catalog or a cap or anything, and they'd bring it back. And so it's all of a sudden it's these guys, the owner and the starter of Perception says, hey, do you want a job? I'm like, what? Yeah. He paid me absolute shit. He was paying me $12,000 a year.
Yeah.
It was but it got me going, you know. He got me a work permit for the States. And so I moved to Easley. And we did the first boat we did was the Corsica, you know, out the gate, and it was a huge success. And so after that, he kept me on. You know, we did the Corsica S, and a whole bunch of other boats as well, of course. So
what boats did you work on while you were there?
Well, boats that I was almost exclusively did was the Corsica S, the Corsica Matrix, the Slasher, that was the C1 slalom boat, the Revolution, the Revolution, which was that catamaran
thing, yeah, I remember this.
And then I worked with Richard Fox on taking his
reflex
and putting it in plastic. So it was basically his design.
Yeah.
But Dansel, who was the main designer at Perception, he was mostly doing the Aquaterra sea kayaking stuff by then. So I was doing the whitewater stuff, and Alan was doing the sea kayaking and recreational stuff.
Right.
So those are the boats that went to market. And then I worked on a whole bunch of other things. I did a planing hold boat that was kind of like the Triple X. We called it the Blackout. And it was a little bit like Triple X. It was about 10 feet long. It was based and was inspired by squirt boats. But the idea was that you couldn't do a rotor-molded squirt boat. Well, I didn't think you could. Obviously, the Enigma eventually did it. But so the idea was that it was going to be something that you could flat water cartwheel, and you could blast pour-overs, and you could do a lot of the squirt boat stuff, but you probably weren't going to be doing mystery moves in it.
Like, where did the Sabre factor into all that? That was right around the time of the Sabre.
No, the Sabre was a little bit before. The Sabre came out in about 85, because I had a Sabre in South Africa. So that was my boat choice. I went to Perception with the Sabre. That's the boat I was paddling. So, but the Sabre was 12 feet. This thing here was, or 12 and a half feet. This boat was 10 feet, and it was literally like a triple X. It had a planing hull, a little narrower than the triple X, a little bit smaller ends possibly than the triple X. And I did a couple of rodeos in this boat. In the blackouts at the Akoi Rodeo in 89 or something, I competed in the blackouts in the surface boat class, and I was linking ends and stuff in hellhole in this thing, but nobody knew what to do with it. I mean, how do you score that? And that's kind of when I got into rodeo as well. I took the Sabre and I cut it down in length, and I did a boat called the Light Sabre. So basically, cut the Sabre down to about 9 feet, which at the time was impossibly short.
Right.
But it had the same sort of volume distribution. It was kind of RPM-ish looking, sort of, I mean, but very basically, it was literally whacked a foot and a half of each end of the Sabre, put a little bit more volume in the center of the boat to compensate for it, so it was a little bit more retentive. It still had a round hole on it. But I remember going to Double Trouble, and I could do retendos in Double Trouble, where I could, on the Akoi, where I could surf it, and I could do not really a blunt, but somewhere between a blunt and a retendo type thing like that. And
were these moves being done anywhere else, or were this just sort of exclusive things you were doing exclusively? How are the genesis of these tricks coming about? Because this is sort of the beginning of the explosion of rodeo.
There were some guys on the West Coast who were doing what I later learned was called a retendo, and another one that was called a wingover, where it was basically a bob's hole. They were in a dancer, and they would go to the corner of the hole and they would spin, and as they would spin in the corner of the hole, they would let the end of their boat catch, and it would stand the boat up, but they were already sort of in mid-turn and mid sort of spin, and this not a flat boat spin, but a normal edge of a hole spin, and it would lift the nose of the boat up to about 45 degrees, or a little bit past that, and it would bring that around and stick them back in the hole facing upstream again, and they were calling that a retendo. And then a wingover was when you basically got it wrong, and it was kind of like what the entrance to a McNasty is now, but this is in a 10-6 or an 11-foot boat kind of thing. But it was just like the entrance to a McNasty style move. So there were guys on the West Coast who were doing that, the Rob Lesses and some other guys out there. But I wasn't aware of it at the time. I didn't know that they'd already invented that wheel.
So when did you leave Perception? What transpired? Did you want to branch out on your own, or what happened?
I was an idiot. I wanted to design more radical, more advanced stuff. I'd done the blackouts, and Bill didn't want to build it. I was working on an asymmetric C1 design. The idea was that the boat was symmetrical end to end, but asymmetrical side to side. So if you were a lefty, you would face one way. If you were a righty, you'd put the saddle in the other way, face the other way. And the boat was asymmetric, so it would compensate for the fact that you're only paddling on one side, and it would go in a straighter line. And it worked. And then I did a smaller boat based on that. And Davey Hearn and John Lugwell both tested it, and they said this thing worked, but they had their own things going, and it sort of required a bit of a skill and adaptation. It was too close to the Olympics to doing any switching. There were these different boats that I was working on, and I wanted to put these things into production, and Bill wanted nothing to do with it. So,
I mean, did Bill not see the writing on the wall? I mean, because the sport at that was about completely. I mean, maybe not towards asymmetric C1s, but certainly.
I mean, that sounds like $1 million idea if I've ever heard of it.
But I mean, the blackouts, which I wanted to build, which was a triple X, Bill, his argument was, okay, so who's going to paddle that? And I said, well, me. Yeah. And he goes, yeah, but there's nobody like you. People aren't like you who don't paddle boats. And I said, no, we're the future.
Yeah.
Your generation is dying out. We're the future.
The RPM came around, and then that was it. I mean, then the game was on,
Yeah. Well, I mean, that didn't really happen until the or maybe 93 or something like that. And this is 1991. So I approached New Wave with this design, and I asked New Wave if they wanted to build it. And they said, yeah, sure. So I sent them the plug. Bill found out about it immediately and promptly fired me on the spot.
Right.
Understandably, I mean, I was working for Perception, and then I sold this design, which I designed at home in my backyard with my own money and my own materials. But nonetheless, you can definitely see the conflict of interest from his perspective. And so he fired me on the spot. At that point, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go train full time for the Olympics. This was in early 1991. So I put my head down and I did that and went to Barcelona. And then when I came back in 93 is when I really got into rodeo paddling, like as a full-time profession.
When did Savage come about?
Savage was 94. So in 1992, when I was in Europe, I saw the prototype of the Prion Hurricane and at Augsburg, and I got to paddle it there. This was during the Slalom World Cup in Augsburg, and I paddled the boat. And I was able to link up these ends in the Wasmachine on the artificial course. I was just literally swapping ends, 2-3 ends at a time, which I started to do in the Lightsaber, but not really. And the Hurricane was a really good boat. Made some suggestions to them of what they could improve on this boat. Some of them they did, some of them they didn't. And they did some other things to it. And then when I came back to the States in the fall of 92, I was at GAF, and the Prion rep had the first plastic Hurricane in the U.S. there at GAF that he was showing off. And I walked up to him and I said, this was Scott Hornsby, and I said, hey, that's the boat I want to paddle next year at the rodeo circuit. And he said, hang on a second. And he went and made a phone call, and he came back and goes, okay, Prion can offer you this much money a month, this many air tickets around the world, this much post a year. But we can't do more than this. Like, will you accept? I was like, yeah, I'll accept.
That's how we still roll like that too.
I couldn't believe it. I was hoping they were going to give me pro form, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, paddlers need to take note that actually happened back then. You know?
Yeah, it doesn't happen anymore, that's for sure. But, and, you know, I mean, it was probably like, you know, Sean Baker was on somebody's payroll, on Eskimo's payroll, but as far as I know, not really anybody else was being paid to paddle. They were always something else. They were a designer at the company, or they were a sales rep, or they had a job other than paddling for the company. And that's kind of when the arms race started, you know, was with the Prion Hurricane. Because then I was touring around the States on their bill, going to every event being held everywhere. And immediately Perception and Dagger realized, we got to get on this, because everywhere this guy goes, Prion sells 30 Hurricanes.
Right.
And by the end of 93, you know, Perception and Dagger had teams. Actually, it was before the end of 93. It was probably mid-93, because by the time the Worlds came around, which were, in September 93, it had probably been 2-3 months that Dagger and Perception had full-time team. I mean, it was instantaneous. It was 3 months from no such thing as a pro team to every manufacturer having a pro team and having a boat like the Hurricane. You know, Perception came out with the Super Sport. Dagger was working on the Transition. Piranha had the not the stunt bat, but the stunt master or master stunter or something like that. You know, something like that. I forget what it was. And it was instantaneous. It was so quick, and all of a sudden you went from nobody being paid to paddle to 30 people in the U.S. being paid to paddle, and the circus started. That was the beginning of the circus, you know.
Yeah. So
everybody at home is writing down the names of these boats to start looking for them on Craigslist.
Yeah, it was was it the stunt bat? It was like the master bat. No, maybe master bat. Anyway.
So Savage. When did you start Savage? Or did you start Savage? Like, that was a weird collection of people. I remember that.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I started Savage. So by the time the Worlds in 93 came along, I realized the limitations of the Hurricane.
But these were all displacement held boats, essentially.
No, still displacement. I hadn't gone back to planing hole in my head yet. You know, because like I said, the first planing hole boats that I did, they paddled like a door. It was, you know, like I could get on the wave and I could do a 180 and sometimes a 360, and that was kind of cool. But for everything else, they sucked. It didn't paddle well. And this wasn't because planing hole didn't work. It's because I wasn't doing it right. But we didn't know how to do it right yet. So I did another boat called the Scorpion, which I designed. And the Scorpion, I really went radical with the volume change. I went to super, super skinny ends with a lot of volume in the middle of the boat. And I went to Prion with this, and oh my God, I'm a popular guy today. I went to Prion with this, and I said, hey, do you want to build this board? Oh my God, okay, 1 second. Hey, I'm in the middle of an interview. Sorry, guys, just 1 second here.
This is the first. This is the first for the Hammer Factory.
Where is he right now? Is he in
Quebec? Montreal.
Can you guys even see me?
Nah, can't see you, but we can hear you.
Oh, okay. All right. Bon, ben merci. Parfait. Je vais tester ça. Ouais. Okay. Excuse. All right. Merci. Hein.
Yeah, the Scorpion. I mean, the Scorpion in my mind was the first modern playboat.
Yeah, it was the first boat that you would put, or was the first modern produced playboats. I mean, Corona had the stunt bats in about 89.
But that didn't look like playboats today. I mean, you could see a descendant from every playboat today to the Scorpion. I mean, there is.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Lewis is giving me a doubtful look here, but
the concept.
I guess I don't see the Scorpion as that big of a departure from the Hurricane.
It was a planing hull boat. Yeah. I mean,
no. The Scorpion.
I'm thinking of the Fury, I guess.
Yeah.
You're thinking of the Fury. No, the Scorpion. If you looked at the Hurricane, and you got to the end of the boat, it was if you moved about a foot back from the tip of the nose, the boat was pretty much the same height as it was in width. Not quite, but almost. It was still very cigar shaped. Even though the deck dished down, the Scorpion was significantly thinner in height than it was in width. You could put that boat on edge and slice it through the water. It was the first boat that I paddled that I could sit on the top of a foam pile of a hole and just whip ends. And it went from, in a hurricane where you do 3-4 ends linked up to getting the Scorpion prototype, and within a week or two, so this wasn't an increase of skills. This wasn't that my skill set improved from year to year. This was within days of being in the Scorpion prototype, where I went from linking 3 or 4 ends in a row, reset, 3 or 4 ends, reset, to linking 15 ends in sequence with splits in the middle of it. So it was a massive departure in that sense. And I went to Prion with this boat, and they had no interest. I mean, their molds were so expensive. They said, look, there's no point for us to do this. The Hurricane is still a good boat. And I said, yeah, now. But I guarantee you that by next year, Perception and Dagger, who basically copied the Hurricane, the transition was basically a Hurricane, and the Super Sport was a little bit different, but still. I said, by this time next year, they're going to have boats which are radically different from the Hurricane and radical improvements, and we got to stay on it. And they had no interest. And I was hanging out with a buddy of mine in Asheville at the time who was dating this millionairess, Celine Toms. And he paddled the prototype and thought it was awesome. And he went to his girlfriend and said, hey, we've got an opportunity here. We should build this thing. And so Celine told me, well, give me a business proposal. So I did a business proposal. She said, right, I'll fund this. And that's how we started Savage.
And so after the Scorpion came the Fury. That's the boat I was thinking of.
Yeah, so you're thinking about the Fury. So the Scorpion wasn't even in production yet, and I was already working on the Fury. So the irony of the Scorpion is by the time the Scorpion came out in plastic, I already had no interest in paddling it because I had the first Fury prototype, and which we called the fucking Groovin at the time. It was insanely short at the time. It was the Fury, because the Scorpion was 10 feet. The Fury, I think, was about 6'8" or 6'6". Huh. This is at a time when all boats were 10. So It was really short. And I eventually went up in length. It went up in length to about 7'6" or 7'4" or something like that eventually by the time it came out in plastic. And it evolved from being sort of the whippet and the whiplash were very much similar in shape to what the original Fury looked like. So I was on tour. They saw the Fury, and they decided they came up with the Whippet and the Whiplash, and Dagger stuck with the round hole, and they went with the RPM, and I was working on the Fury, which, like I said, looked a little bit like a Whippet or Whiplash, and then by the time it went into production, which was a year later, it looked like that side-cut, weird-looking snowboard thing, which is eventually what came out.
I was paddling for Dagger back then. And I remember Joe Pulliam called me. And he asked me what I thought about these short boats with planing hulls, and he mentioned the Fury, or he mentioned a couple others, and I said I think they're really dumb. I don't think they're not great for instruction. They're really not going anywhere. So I put my name in that list of claim chowder there. So I remember the next time I ran into you would have been in Ottawa in '97. Was it '97 where there was a bit of a controversy over flat spinning a wave? Does that sound familiar?
Well, that wasn't over flat spins, but yeah, that's '97 was the controversial year. Yeah.
I mean, because at that point, I mean, Rodeo was really hitting mainstream. You saw, I mean, I think all of us, and that was the first year IR was in business, and I think all of us thought we were going to be $10 to $20 million companies within 5 years. I mean, that's how fast the sport was growing. It was an exciting, heady time. But the sport was changing in the sense that you showed up at the Ottawa, and your boat was allowing you to do some tricks that no one else could do. What was it again?
We were doing all the wave stuff. We were spinning, blunting. Yeah. We were doing all the vertical blunt stuff. We were doing all the stuff on the green waves. We weren't doing any aerial stuff yet. That came at the end of that year. So it wasn't until a couple of months after the Ottawa Worlds that I started doing the first aerial blunts. The Ottawa thing there's a huge controversy around that whole thing that happened there. But essentially, what happened in the '96 pre-Worlds is we had the hammer, the Riot hammer, at the '96 pre-Worlds, and most people still had a normal round style boat, although Dagger had the Vertigo and Perception had the Whippet and the Whiplash, and Wavesport had the Kinetic. So these were what I was referring to as semi-planing.
And so just to be clear, at this point you had moved on from Savage. I think Savage kind of imploded financially, or something odd happened there, and then you moved on to Riot, right? I mean, it's a bit of a long story, but basically the owner of Savage, Celine, was a Hollywood prima donna, and she's nice enough. I can't bash her. This is a lady who gave a kayak dirtbag bum like me $100,000 to go start a kayaking company, so I can't complain. Right.
But she had her own ideas of how the kayak company should be run, and those differed very dramatically and very radically from what I thought, how I felt the company should be run. And it just got to the point to where life was unpleasant. I didn't want to go to work, and she didn't want to go to work, and nobody wanted to see each other. And, I got into a phone argument with her while I was in Canada meeting with the Savage distributor, and she fired me on the phone. And I hung up the phone, and I looked at the guy, and I said, well, I was just fired from Savage. And he looked at me and said, you want to start a new kayak company?
Was that the start of Riot? I mean, was that how Riot got started?
Riot, yeah. And that was Riot. That's how it started,
And so I think, I think I should point out also during that time, I mean, kayaking was moving from like a sport that was, 10 years earlier was more like backpacking. I mean, it was just sort of a generic outdoor sport, and you had a canoe club, you went out with your dad, and maybe you saw Deliverance, and you had a canoe. Suddenly becoming an extreme sport, but the people running the bigger companies, your Pulliams and your Bill Masters, were old school guys, and they were moving along. They were moving along with this idea of the sport changing, but there was a younger crowd out there who thought that kayaking should look a lot different than it did. And Savage and Riot were both moving faster and farther and harder along that image than anyone else. When people talked about kayaking should look like a Volcom, or it should look like a core surf brand, Riot was doing that. You know what I mean? More. Right. I remember the ads you guys were running back then. Were it was what a lot of us thought the direction the sport should be going. I mean, it was that nuance is kind of lost nowadays, where the sport's sort of engulfed by that idea. But back then, this was a pretty radical thing, I remember you ran an ad. I can't remember what it was. You ran an ad for either Savage or Riot where it had a bunch of girls. I think they were more or less naked. They were spray painted silver or something at the base of a waterfall.
Yeah, so that was a Savage ad. It was one girl. This was the owner of Savage, or the other owner of Savage. This was Celine, who she had aspirations of being a Playboy model and things like that. And so her idea was to do this ad and basically be naked and painted in body paint, which I was, totally fine with. I'm like, yeah, let's, we had limited amounts of money to throw at advertising. So my theory of advertising was, I'm going to run one ad this year in Paddler Magazine. That's all I can afford, because this is before social media. So I'm going to run one ad, and I want the entire world to know we exist.
You did that.
With one ad.
Mission accomplished.
Pull that off.
I mean, there was nothing.
If you wanted to send hate mail.
I mean, there was nothing like that in Paddle Sports publications.
Right.
And
the ad they ran wasn't the one that we submitted. The one that they ran, they were too afraid to run the one that we. I'm sure you've seen the poster. You've seen that Savage poster with the golden lady on it.
Oh yeah.
That's what the ad was, but it's not the ad that ran. They wouldn't run that one. The one that we ran was, and they wouldn't run it as a spread, which is what we wanted to run. They ran it as a quarter page, kind of tucked away in the back of the magazine, because they wanted to. They were afraid. Paddle Magazine was terrified. And you had like one nipple that you could see. It was like her hair was sort of on it. It wasn't nearly as risque as the one that I wanted to run, but it's all they would do. But it had the same effect. I mean, like I said, back then, if you wanted to send somebody hate mail, you couldn't just send them a Facebook message or send them an email. You had to pull out a piece of paper, a pen, and you had to write this letter. You had to put it in an envelope and find a stamp and lick it and go to the post office. I mean, you had to be motivated to send somebody hate mail, and I got bags of this shit.
So back at 97, you're in a riot boat, and you're doing a lot of wave moves, and the establishment isn't too into that idea, and you had a bit of a protest there.
Yeah, but what happened was now this is the beginning of internet and email communication, really. I mean, it started in the early 90s, but by 96, most people who had real jobs had access to at least internet and email at work, if not at home. And so Mark Scriver, who was the organizer of the Canada World Championships, he decided that he was going to take this to the next level in technology, and all communication was going to be done via email. So one of the things that happened at the 96 Worlds is that we were going out in the hammer and we were doing all these wave spins. We weren't really blunting, but we were doing wave spins, and Mark Cena was there in the Neki Rip, and he was also doing these wave spin things, and somebody else was paddling for Neki, and he was kind of doing those things a little bit, and so we were doing all these things, but there was no system to judge it at the 96 Worlds because it didn't exist. How do you judge something there was no such thing as trophy moves. There was no such thing as points for wave moves. So what the organizers said was, look, okay, we need to have everybody put in their feedback and input of what the scoring system and the point values for each move should be. It's going to be in by December 31st, 1996, and then that's going to be set in stone for the 97 Worlds. And two people took the effort to send in suggestions, myself and somebody from Europe. I think it was in the UK. And so essentially the entire scoring system was based upon the suggestions from myself and this guy in the UK. We basically built the scoring system for the 97 Worlds. Mark sent out all these emails to everybody saying, okay, this is the scoring system. And not a single person from another company ever bothered to check their email once between December and September 1997.
I'm kind of the same way.
So what happened was that we showed up 2 weeks before the World Championships at the Ottawa Rodeo, and the Ottawa Rodeo said, okay, well, we're going to use the world's scoring system to test it and see how it goes. And basically every other athlete was like, what the fuck is this? What are these rules? Where do these come from? So Mark pulls out his little notes and he goes, here are the minutes from the meeting that we had in September of 96. This is what we agreed on. Only 2 people contributed to the rule set. You all had opportunity. I sent you all these emails. Nobody responded. It's your problem. They had the rules. You had the rules. And Corran went and designed a better boat based on the rules. He said, now that these rules for wave moves are really going to be scored, I'm going to go out and design a real boat that's designed to compete and win rodeos on a wave, not in a hole, which is what I did. And basically, it looked like it was going to be a complete sweep. And we had like 5 glides, composite glides there in the eddy, and nobody could touch it. Like with the rules the way they were set up, it was going to be an absolute hammering where you were going to have 1 through 5th were going to be riot boats, and then everybody else was going to be a distance 6th. And understandably, everybody protested. This isn't fair. This is bullshit. How are we supposed to compete with this? This is not fair. We need to put the rules back to where they were in 1996. So they had a meeting 3 days before the Worlds, and what they did was they were very clever. You got to hand it to them. They were very clever. They didn't even bring up the rules that were in place, the new scoring system. What they said was, there's some safety issues. There's some things about whether we have grab loops on boats or not. We need to be able to change the rules in order to be up to date with safety and things like this, all the way up to the day before the World Championships, so that we can make sure that we're in line with things that are happening. And there was a vote on it, and everybody voted yes. And then immediately somebody stood up and raised their hand and said, I'd like to have a motion to put the rules back to where they were in 1996. And it was immediately voted yes, and that was it. And so the rules were set back to 1996. Meanwhile, I had a boat that was absolutely shit in the hole. It was terrible in the hole.
Right.
But it was awesome on the wave. So at this point, I hadn't done a cartwheel in 6 months. I had been training wave stuff according to the rules. I designed a boat for wave moves according to the rules. And then now all of a sudden it was the opposite. Instead of it being riot 1st through 5th, I think riot was 25th through 30th or something. And I just said, screw it. I'm not even going to. This is bullshit. And
So how long were you with Riot? Like you started with Riot somewhere around 95, 96, and then you were with them for a decade or so, right?
Well, I mean, you'd say 2 decades, right? I mean, you think about how much noise we made.
Yeah.
5 years. 5 years.
Huh. Wow.
That's it.
So
Amazing, huh?
So, Corran, did you design the disco?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, in my eyes, that was Playboat evolution has kind of quit from that point to now. So, big hats off to that one. And did you design anything after that at Riot? Playboat.
Yeah. So the disco actually, we actually did the 007 before we did the glide. The 007 was 7'2". The disco was 6'6". The 007 had a planing hull, volume in the center, low volume ends. It was the predecessor to the disco, and really the disco wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the 007. But the whole design on it wasn't as evolved as the glide hull. The glide hull was phenomenal. And so we decided that we wanted to do a 007 size shape with the glide volume distribution and the glide hull. And the first disco, we literally took a glide, cut the ends off it, and welded it up and went out and paddled. That was quite literally the first disco. The disco was revolutionary, and I think it's a safe comment to say that all modern freestyle boats are derivatives of the disco.
I'll 100% agree with that.
There isn't a freestyle boat on the market that's not a derivative of the disco. That being said, if you actually paddled the disco today, compared to the modern freestyle boats, you would think it is a piece of shit.
Yeah.
So they have definitely evolved. The boats are phenomenally better in every way than the disco ever was, but they couldn't have happened, or maybe they would have happened anyway. Who knows? But the bottom line is that they are all derivatives of that basic concept of the volume ratio proportion of its width to its length to its volume displacement to the kind of a hull it has and where the kick rocker is in it and things like that. Lots of little things that happen. You got edges on the hulls, or you don't have edges, or you've got ribs and you don't have ribs, and you've got dots or you don't, and You had Piranha with blunt boxes and fins came in and went out and out of fashion, and all kinds of things have happened. But they're basically all highly souped up, highly energized discos today.
Yeah.
So what year? What year did you leave?
I left in 2002.
2002. And then what? And then what happened?
I had I started Imagine by then, and I decided that I was kind of tired of designing boats and I was going to make movies. So for 2 years, from 2002 to 2004, Riot was still paying me a retainer to make paddling films, and that's when I did Endgame and Legend of the Falls and a couple of other movies that I did, which were we did Searching for the G-Spot, Searching for the Prostate, which were instructional videos for Riot. That was up to 2004. But to go back to your other question, did I do any boats after the disco? I mean, we did the Dominatrix, we did the Turbo, we did the Booster, which were all highly successful boats. The Dominatrix was part of the whole super slicey, I can only sit in the boat for 15 minutes because my feet hurt, because everybody wanted to go do flat water cartwheels in a surface boat. So we had a lot of good, successful boats. It actually sold more than the disco ever did, really. But by then, we were a bigger company with bigger distribution. But so from 2002 to 2004, I was making movies.
And tell us, Corran, there was a point there when you got into the stand-up paddling scene and started the company. Eventually, I believe you sold it off. What was how did that all come about?
By mistake. I surfed my whole life, but all the way through Riot, I was focused on my career. I was competing. I showed up at the 1991 Worlds. So the Zambezi put in a bid for the 1991 Worlds, and it went to Graz in Austria, which is a pour-over ledge hole. And they didn't go to the Zambezi, and I was very excited about it going to the Zambezi, especially after it being in Sort, which was Sort was 1991, which was a ledge hole. Full James was 1999, which was great. 2001 was Sort, which was a ledge hole, and Zambezi put in a bid for 2003, and it went to Graz instead. And in 2002 at the pre-Worlds, I was hanging out with Arndt Schäfflein and Bernd Sommer, and these are all the Riot paddlers, and we showed up at pre-Worlds and literally pulled up in our van, walked onto the bridge and looked down to the hole, and we saw 2 or 3 people paddling into the hole, just getting their asses handed to them in the hole. And I turned around to Arndt and I said, I think I just retired from freestyle. and Arndt looked at me and he said, "Yup, okay, me too." And Bernd said, "Okay, me too." And Ben Brown was there, and Ben said, "Yup, okay, me too." And we all just walked back to the van, and we got in the van and drove away. We didn't even tell anybody. So we'd all registered, paid our entrance fees, and we just drove away. Screw this.
I mean, do you think you saw an inherent flaw in the sport at that point where it just was, because I think history has shown that sport has never really lived up to his expectations early on. You know what I mean? For whatever reason.
I mean, what the guys are doing now, you see them on these big waves, and what they're doing now is so far ahead of anything that we ever dreamed that we were going to do. I mean,
but it's not really in a competition setting. You know what I mean?
No, it's not. So the competition setting was a disappointment. The problem that I had was that every single, we talk about 1997, and that's the one that is famous because of my protest. But every single Worlds, I had this fight where I showed up at the World Championships, and I had to paddle using skill sets that I hadn't used in a whole year because everybody was a year behind. I mean, Full James, which was in New Zealand, now, Waysport had the full play, which was like the glide. And I can't remember what Perception and Dagger had. I think they had the medieval at Dagger. Perception had Mr. Clean or something. I forget what it was. Anyway, and I had the disco. So, I was sitting in Full James. By this time, I'd spent the whole year at Lachines on Big Joe using the wave as a ramp, doing Pan Ams and air screws. We weren't doing the helix yet, but we were doing air screws. We were doing Pan Ams. We were doing these flip turns, which was the lead into the helix. We were looping, like consistently doing these loops. And I, show up at the Worlds in 1999 at Full James, and they have another meeting, and they decide, no, you can't blunt in front of the wave. You've got to go all the way out onto the side of the wave to blunt on the diagonal. And I said, well, you just want to do that because you're in long, fast boats. You're in an 8-foot boat. Of course you want to go blunt on the diagonal. You can't blunt in front of the wave. But that's your problem, not my problem. I've evolved.
I mean, your story's kind of an archetype, though. I mean, what sport doesn't have a Maverick set? I mean, even like golf has people bringing out new clubs, and an establishment says no. I mean, I also feel like there was like the Jackson paradigm, which is sort of the establishment of rodeo, and they're still plugging away at it. And then there was sort of the Corran Addison paradigm, which was a lot more disruptive. I mean, would you say that's true?
Yeah, definitely I was disruptive. I mean, we live and learn as we get older, or at least we hope we learn. But, I'm at Full James, and I'm like, well, I don't think I can win the Worlds in a disco, so I'm going to get back in my glide, and I'm going to have to figure out how to paddle this thing again because I haven't been in it for a year. I've got to go remember how to do a blunt out in the diagonal. I've got to go remember how to cartwheel an 8-foot boat because I've been cartwheeling a 6.5-foot boat, and I've been doing big blunts and Pan Ams in front of the waves, and if you're not going to score my moves in front of the hole, like if I come off the top and I come down the face and I hit the green at the bottom and I bounce into the air, basically butt bouncing, what butt bouncing is. If you're not going to score that, then I'm going to go get in a long boat. So that was, in 1999. Then we go to Sorts in 2001. And by this point, I'd figured out how to loop on command. I was looping. I was doing Space Godzillas. I was doing front loops, back loops, Space Godzillas left, Space Godzillas right. I was doing them on the front of the boat and the back of the boat. And they have another meeting at the Worlds, and they decide, no, all those are the same move. You can only do one of them. Like, well, you're just saying that because you can't do those moves. You want to do a bunch of cartwheels and split wheels. And, that's what Liquid Logic had, like the session, which, I mean, look at Barry Keenan would go out there in the session, and he would
just do cartwheels.
That guy was a machine. I mean, what he did to that hole in that boat, it was amazing. But, so then I'm sitting there going, well, hang on, I got to go pull out my dominatrix now and go and do a whole bunch of slicey end moves because you don't want to score my loops? What is this shit? And eventually I decided, fuck it. No, and I decided at Sort that my goal was to win the Worlds without having the cartwheel variance on my score sheet. Like I wasn't going to do one single cartwheel the whole event and try and win it based on not doing a cartwheel. Only loops and everything else like that. And I went out there and I did Space Godzillas and loops and everything else, but they only scored one of them. So if I went in and did a front loop, I got that. I did a back loop, I got that. Then if I did a left Space Godzilla, didn't get it. Right Space Godzilla, don't get it. Left back Space Godzilla, don't get it. Same thing for the right. So I do 8 moves and I got 2. So I was also just frustrated. I was like, I'm so sick of this. And when I showed up at Sort, not in Sort, but at Graz, and it was just going to be more of the same in this poundy hole, I was like, fuck this, I'm out of here. I'm tired of fighting.
And that's when and how did you transition to the stand-up paddling from there?
So I get back home after my tour of Europe, and I was like, right, well, I'm going surfing. And I grabbed my surfboard, and I paddled out into Lachines. I just swam out into Lachines with my surfboard, and I just started surfing. And I used to paddle 6 times a week at Lachines in my kayak, and within 8 months, I was kayaking once a week, and I was out there, the other 5 times on a surfboard. And by about 2006, I just was not even getting in a kayak anymore. The only time I'd ever get in a kayak, because I was working for Dragarosi, is I would design a new boat for him. I'd get in the boat, spend a week testing it, make the changes to it, and then wouldn't get back in the boat again until the next time I'd had to design a kayak. I just stopped kayaking. And then I went to the beach with a buddy of mine, and he was telling me about this new sport that he'd seen in Hawaii, stand-up paddling. He said, basically, it's like a longboard, but bigger. And I was like, bigger than a longboard? You got to be joking. It sounds like the most retarded thing in the world. No, it's really fun. I was like, no, it's not. I'm a shortboarder. I have no interest in a longboard, let alone a bigger longboard.
Could you get a shortboard out to the wave at Lachine?
Oh, all day long. Yeah, all day long. No problem.
Huh.
So we went down to the beach, and it was like 27 degrees Fahrenheit was the air temperature. It was freezing cold, and we were in 5 mil or 7 mil wetsuits. This is in New Hampshire, and he had his stand-up paddleboard. So I'm in the water, which is 45 degrees. He's standing in the air, which is 27 degrees. Within 30 minutes, he was frozen. So he says, "Hey, do you want to switch out for a little bit?" I'm like, "No." Like, come on, I just need to warm up. Like, I'll jump on my board. I'll jump on your board. I just need to sit in the water for a little while and warm up in 45-degree water, and then we can switch back out. I'm like, all right, fine. So I got on his board, and I paddle out, and I paddle onto a wave, and I surfed it in, and I'm paddling back out. He goes, "What do you think?" And I was like, "Nah, this thing's stupid." But in my mind, I was like, that was pretty awesome. But I didn't want to tell him that. And after maybe 30 minutes, he's like, "Okay, I'm warm now. We can switch back out." I was like, No, it's cool, dude. Just warm up some more. I'm fine. And I was having a ball on this thing. But this thing was like 10 and a half feet or 11 feet long. It was like 30 inches wide. It was a tank. And when we were driving home, I was like, I bet you could make a shortboard stand-up paddleboard. I bet you could make this thing under 7 feet. And he was like, no. They tried to do some boards that were like under 10 feet, and they didn't work, and, they were no good. And I'm like, yeah, I think for the river you could do it. You could make a 7-foot stand-up paddleboard for a river, make it 30 inches wide, make it short. So I shaped one up that week, and it was awesome. Took it to Hawaii with me like that fall. And people are like, "What is that thing?" Like, "It's a stand-up paddleboard." No. Stand-up paddleboards are like 11 feet long. I'm like, no, it's a stand-up paddleboard, really.
Did you have the river in the back of your mind when you made that shortboard?
Yeah. When I first did it, because the longboard, I was like, "Hey, this was really fun at the beach, but you're not going to fit in a 11-foot board on the waves out here." I was like, I want to go down to the Lachines on a stand-up paddleboard and go surf that. So the first one I did was. Actually, I think it was like 7.6, the first one. And then I shaped up another one that was like 6.11. And that was my go-to board for a long time here. But,
So who else was making boards that short at that time?
Nobody that I knew of.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of a stand-up paddleboard under about 9.5 feet. So this is like 2006, 2007.
Right.
I'm sure somebody did. I'm not claiming to have invented. I'm sure somebody did. I just never heard of it, and I haven't seen one. But when I went to Hawaii in 2008, I went out to Waimea on an 8.6. I surfed avalanches on my 8.6.
I can't imagine you got a good reception going out to Waimea on a stand-up paddleboard. I'm picturing some angry locals.
Oh yeah. Because stand-up paddleboarding was definitely not cool in 08. Definitely. Luckily, I was friends with Garrett McNamara, and so I would go out there with him, and people would start giving me a lip, and Garrett would just say, "Hey, shut up, leave him alone. He's cool. He's got this." And most of the time, people they didn't like it, but they would cut me some slack.
Right.
And then I went to Makaha, and this was in 09. I went to Makaha in really big day and went out there, and most of the guys were only surfing the pocket on the far right, and there was one local dude on a gun. And then I was on my stand-up paddleboard, and we were taking off all the way deep inside on this thing, and we were out there for a couple of hours. And the guy gave me props, when I came in, and he was like, "Dude, that was awesome. Like, that's how stand-up paddling should be." And the next day when I went out, and I think it was at Himalayas, or maybe it was Rocky Point, but anyway, on the North Shore, we went out the North Shore, and this guy came up to me and he goes, "Hey, were you the guy at Makaha yesterday?" Yeah, I was at Makaha. He goes, and you turn around to the other guy in the line, and he goes, "He's cool. Leave him alone. The guy's cool. You should have seen him yesterday at Makaha." And then from then on, I kind of got a break. Like, I got left alone.
Huh. So you start making boards then?
Yeah, well, I've been making boards since 06, surfboards. And then we started making stand-up boards in 08, 2008. We started making those. And then by 09, we developed this eco technology where we were using...
Under what was your brand?
Imagine.
Right. Just to refresh everyone's mind out there.
Yeah, Imagine. So we developed this technology. I was using recycled cores. I was using pine sap resin and bamboo fiber. So no fiberglass. not using regular epoxies and recycled cores, and we reduced the carbon footprint by a cubic meter on these boards. And we won 2 awards. We won an award for ISPO, the best new sporting industry product. So all categories of the entire sporting industry, we won the overall first prize for this eco surfboard that you could split into 2 pieces for travel, because airlines now weren't taking boards anymore. So we developed a technology to split it into pieces that you could then assemble within a minute when you got to your destination. The whole thing ecological. And then this investment group in California approached me and asked if I'd be interested in selling them the company. And they gave me $2 million for it.
That was that. You should have been like, I'm an artist. Fuck you. I don't want money. Say true to your core. So then what? I mean, now you're on. Now we have Soul Waterman.
Yeah. There's something super. Go ahead, Corran. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No. Go ahead.
So there's something super interesting that you got going on with the Soul Waterman is to send in your CAD design and build, and basically you'll build that boat. How does that work?
Well, no, it's not. I mean, you could send in your CAD design, but it's I do the CAD design for them. So basically, this is standard in surfing. This is the normal thing. Unless you're just learning to surf, or you're on a vacation somewhere and you snap your board and you got to have another board right now, you march into a surf shop and you pick a board up off the shelf. But in surfing, anybody worth their salt has a board made for them. You go in, you see your shaper, and you say to your shaper, hey, I want to get a new 6'2" short board for a steep beach break. I like quads, so I definitely want I want a quad set up. I want it to be really loose, but I like getting deep in the pockets the waves where I surf are really hollow. I'm a really good surfer, but I'm front foot heavy. I tend to surf a lot on the front foot rather than the back foot. I'm 5'10" and 170 pounds, and I've been surfing for 30 years. I'm an expert. And the guy will make a board for you. And this board is designed to do all the little things that you just mouthed off on. This is normal in surfing. It's unheard of in kayaking. And the reason why it's unheard of in kayaking is there's a very big difference. On a surfboard, you shape up the blank and you gloss it and you sand it and off you go. Kayaking, you got to make a mold. Even if it's a fiberglass boat, you still got to make a mold. You got to make a mold to make this boat. And generally, kayaks have been hand-shaped, which this is a big, big thing to hand-shape a kayak. It's a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
So with CAD, what's come along is that, I will basically design this kayak. We CNC a temporary mold. We laminate this boat inside the temporary mold. We break the mold off of the boat. And then we do the finishing work on the boat afterwards and give it to the customer. And so what we've managed to do is basically bring to kayaking the exact same thing as surfing does, where we are offering people the ability to come to me and say, hey, I hang out at Garbaretta on the Ottawa all the time. Oh,
you there, Corran? Oh, man, just getting to the part I wanted to hear.
I know, right?
Corran, are you there? Oh, I'm going to try him again.
Really weird. I've got a really long left leg and a short right leg. And, I need you to make a boat that'll make my kayaking experience more fun, and we can do it. And it's never been heard of. Or Charlie Walbridge. Hey, his favorite boat is the Han, which is from 1972. And he's bought a whole bunch of boats since then, and he hasn't liked them. Can you make me a modern Han? Sure, dude. No problem.
He doesn't want a modern Han. He wants the old Han.
Well, he wants the old Han with a little bit of modernization, but not too much.
So how many of
he wants to take out some rocker out of that boat.
Do some camber.
Right.
So how many of these custom boats are out there right now, Corran?
Well, the first production run, so we only announced it in the beginning of December. The first production run started at the end of December. It's about a 3-month process to make these boats. So the first dozen are going to be leaving China probably next week. And it's a month on the water. for them to get here. So it'll be about a month's time that these are going to end up in people's hands. The second order, which we start production on Monday, we've got 3 dozen, which are going into production.
So I gotta ask,
Yeah.
how are these boats so cheap? They seem
Questions abound.
A boat. Yeah, a boat. How do we do it so cheap?
And so cheap.
I mean,
It's
seems like
$1,600 on the website, correct?
Yeah.
It's sort of starting at, right?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's Chinese labor with Chinese overhead, so that makes a big difference. You couldn't do it here for that. The other thing is that the material that we use to buy the mold, you can't get in the U.S. You can't make it in the U.S. because there's some nastiness in there which don't fall in line with EPA standards, although that looks like it's going out the door. So maybe next year we could do it. It's like it's going out the EPA.
we're getting rid of EPA here real soon.
Yeah, that's
So
it's superlative at this point.
yeah, we would have to import the material to make these temporary molds, which is cost prohibitive, and so we're not making a lot of money on it.
I mean, what's your cost on one of these $1,600 boats?
Oh, the $1,600. Well, I don't know if I really want to divulge that, but I'm making
$1,500.
I'm making less than half the margin than I would on a plastic boat.
Right.
And so I see looking at the website as well that you're making them seamless. Talk to me about the process for that. Are you doing it with a bladder or?
Yeah,
we're
using a bladder.
Shapes.
It's infusion, and we use a bladder to mold it. Yeah.
And so, do you have to make a bladder to go along with the shape, or?
Yeah, I can't tell you that.
So what happens if I get my boat? So I mean, with surfing, right? The thing about surfing in the example you're using is that you have an endless amount of shapers to pick from. Each shaper kind of has a reputation. You can go to a shaper that's known to make more of a river running boat, or a shaper that's made more of a playboat. It seems to me if I get a boat from Corran, I'm going to get some variation of a riot boat. Because that's the kind of designer you are. I know what kind of boats you make. So I mean, that's the first thing. You don't. And the other thing would be is I get the boat, I don't like it. I'm like, this honestly sucks. What do you do at that point?
Okay, so the answer to your first question is one of the advantages that happened when I sold my surf company to this company in California is I moved down there, and in a period of 5 years, designed probably close to 1,000 surfboards that I made. The ability to learn to design what the customer wants rather than what you like is something is a skill that I developed over the last 5 years. In other words, I'd have somebody come to me and say, "Hey, I'd like a retro Simmons." A Simmons is a board from the 1960s. I'd like something like a Simmons with possibly a little bit more modern rail in it, but basically I'm looking for a Simmons. Now I would never surf that board in my life. I would have no urge to ever surf a board like that. But I got really good at giving the customer what he wanted. And I think one time, like quite literally one time, the customer said, "Yeah, it's okay. I don't love it. It's not bad, but I don't love it." Which you're gonna get. So some people are going to love boards more than others. They're going to be super stoked or just stoked or incredibly stoked. And that's kind of the downside of custom, which is you can't test it. You can't say to the guy, "Okay, we'll make one. I'll test it. And if I like it, then you can make me mine." It doesn't work that way.
Could I do something like say, I really like the tuna, and maybe wink and say like a lot, wink, and get a boat that's strikingly like a 28-pound tuna?
Yeah. So I just did a boat for a guy. Well, no, absolutely. So I just did a boat for a guy who came to me and he said, "I love the Karma Unlimited. Love the Karma Unlimited. It's my favorite boat. Right. But it's 60 pounds. I want a 30-pound or 35-pound Karma Unlimited. Can you do it?" And I said, "Of course I can do it."
Yeah.
He goes, "Okay, perfect." And I said, "Now, can you honestly tell me that there isn't one single thing about the Karma that you don't like or that you would change?" This is a boat that's designed for winning the green race. Where are you paddling this thing? Oh, I paddle on the Potomac. I run big water stuff, and then I'll go down to O-Deck, and I'll surf the waves down at O-Deck. I'm like, okay, you're surfing in your Karma Unlimited. Yeah. Do you love surfing the Karma Unlimited? Well, no, I kind of prefer the Daiga Outburst. Okay, so right there, we can do something to that boat to make it better for what you're doing on it. I understand that Karma Unlimited is where you want to start, but unless you're like, nope, can't think of a single flaw with this entire design, which I've never heard of, ever.
I like the tuna, except for like the water bottle holder. The shock cord could be a little bit tighter.
No, if it was exactly like, the tuna, yeah. I would probably have to say to you, look, you're going to have to call up the guys and ask them if they mind, because I'm not going to knock them off.
Right.
I'm not going to do that. But marine law is a 10% change in the boat's entirety is considered a new design. Now, 10%, dude, that's nothing. Like, that's plagiarism right there. You can do 11% and you plagiarize somebody else's boat, for sure.
It sort of depends how you're measuring it, though, right? I mean, on another level, it's like, is there a 10% difference between any one creek kayak and another creek and kayak?
Well, almost, because, you know what? There's almost 10% difference between a yellow tuna and a blue tuna. No, I'm serious.
It's kind of a hard thing to quantify, right?
Yeah, so you could get around the legality of it very, very easily. That wouldn't be the problem. But, if somebody said, no, I want exactly that, I'd be like, okay, well, you need to go call Kenny and have a conversation with Kenny, and I need this in writing that he doesn't mind. But in the case with the Karma, once we were done with our discussion, we realized, you know what? The boat's got too much volume in the ends for what he's doing, and he's not creaking. He's not running gorilla. He needs it to be a little bit better to surf. So we wanted to have a little bit less pregnance in the rocker and the tail of the boat. We wanted to have a little bit squarer to the back of the boat. Now, this isn't a boat that I would paddle personally, no interest. But, we worked on this design until we got him, which we fixed all the things about the Karma, which weren't perfect.
Do you start by knocking off the Karma? I mean, do you somehow digitize the Karma and then modify it? Is that the starting point?
No, I don't need to do that. I'll just go online, I'll look. So I was lucky. I have a friend who's got an unlimited, so I just went over to the house and looked at it. So I had an idea what the hull shape looks like. And I grab a top and a side view of the thing. So I can start off with, here's a basic outline, here's a basic rocker. Okay, and I'll do a hull that's basically like it. Okay, this is close enough, all right? This is what we're looking at now. Now, we want to take some of the pregnancy out of the rocker and the tail. We want to square off the tail a little bit. We want to take some of the volume out of both ends. We want to increase the volume in the cockpit just a little bit. We wanted to shorten it up by 3 inches, So these are basically the steps that we went through. And by the time you're all said and done, it doesn't look anything like the Karma. It's not going to paddle anything like the Karma, but it's going to do for him what he liked about the Karma.
Interesting.
So I got to jump back to the manufacturing questions a little bit. What kind of resin are you building these things with?
Epoxy.
Epoxy.
Yeah.
And what's your standard layout?
We got a strong and a light. So the strong layout would be a combination of Kevlars, carbons, and PVC foams. So PVC foam is really nice because it's not quite as strong as Kevlar, but it's pretty strong. And so you have the advantage of ending up with a foam core that's kind of like Corcel or Airex or something like that. But unlike Corcel and Airex, which all those things do, all it does is separate your layers so that you get rigidity. The PVC on top of doing that also gives you impact. So it'll be a combination of mostly Kevlars and PVC with some carbon. And your light layup, we're going to have more carbon, much less Kevlar, and your PVC. And you've reduced the number of layers, you've increased the number of stiffness layers, and reduced the number of impact layers in the boat.
So, have you produced any boats yet with this layup? Like, do any of these exist yet?
Yeah. We did one light and one strong for me to test, which I went over there and paddled them in China. So, I didn't bring them over here. I went over there, paddled them, tested them. This is what we're dealing with the factory. There were all kinds of problems with the first boats that we made. I mean, like teething problems that were, are normal, that we had to sort out. And so that this first batch that's coming in now, that's the first fully production batch done with these layups.
So how many How many, like if I got the strong layup in a creek boat, how many green runs do you think that's good for? Or how many little white runs do you think that's good for? Or do you think it's just really possible?
I don't know yet. I really don't, because I haven't put a strong layup through an environment like the green yet. We have a couple of boats coming. That is the intent. We've got some boats coming, which are basically for me and some of our team paddlers, that are the ideas that they're going to go out and test these things on something like the green. So the two places that we've been telling people to hold off on ordering from us because we don't know if we can deliver what they want is a full-on creek boat where you're going to beat the living tar out of this thing. We know we can do the shapes, but we just don't know what kind of a beating they can take. And a slalom boat where we can't yet get the weights down. You know, the process is pretty cool, but it is more limiting in some ways. And so, like a slalom boat that you want, you know, which is a 3.5 meter boat, which is coming out at 9 kilos. You know, we can't make it under 11 kilos.
Right.
Cool.
You know, not yet. We're working on it, but we're not there yet. So. You know, so people like, because slalom paddles, of course, there's a place where people are like, hey, you know, I love this boat from this company, but I need, for my paddling style, this or that change. And we could do it, but we just can't make it 9 kilos.
Right.
Right on. That's cool.
Well, Corran, we're about to run out of time. What's next for you? What do you see on the what do you see on the horizon? You're definitely not slowing down, that's for sure.
Well, you know, new challenges. You know, I've got a 3-year-old son now, and all of a sudden I understand EJ a little bit better, and how some of his focus changed, and you know, he was doing the fun one and the little mini hero, whatever it's called, and you know, some other boats like that that he did, and you realize how focused you become on trying to do cool stuff with your kid as opposed to just doing cool stuff. So, you know, I designed the Terrible 2, which is this 2-person kayak, but it's a 2-person kayak where the front person is a toddler. I mean, we're talking about 3 to 6-year-olds type thing, you know, and all the challenges of making it a safe and fun experience for somebody like that. It's very different to take a 6-year-old out than it is to take a 12-year-old out. Oh, yeah. You know, a 6-year-old gets a face full of water from a wave, and you might be done forever. So these are things that you have to think about. And, you know, I built him a motorcycle, a little street bike that he's been riding, and we're taking him skiing and snowboarding. And so, you know, the challenge for me is, you know, to introduce my son to all these things that I do so that, you know, I basically have a forced friend. And this is a guy that has to be my mate and has to go do all the stuff that I want to do because I'm going.
Right.
You know, but it's a design challenge. You know, I did a single kayak for basically designed it for my son, but I put him in a fun one. I put him in some other boats, and you know, I realized some stuff. You know, when you're 3 years old, he wants to get in the boat, he wants to paddle around the pool, but he can't paddle straight. And so we put a drop down skeg, the same skeg that we developed for our whitewater sups. We put this drop down skeg in the little boat, the little kayak for him, and you drop the skeg down, and for him the skeg is so big that the boat, if he's doing any kind of a forward stroke at all, the boat goes in a straight line.
Oh, very cool.
Which is going to be encouraging for a 3-year-old. He's going to want to go because it's about success, you know? And so these are the things to me which seem to be the challenge. It's that I'm excited about is spending time with my son doing these things and then developing these products that go hand in hand with this. And it just turns out that I'm of the age now that most of the people that I was competing with and against when I was in my 20s and early 30s now also have young children my age. I mean, we're talking about, you know, Simon Westgart and Cheesy and, you know, all these people who worked at all these different manufacturers all over the, you know, the world, and they work at Palm or Corran or Daga or Prion or wherever it is. And, you know, these guys will come to me and said, hey, you know, I want to get a Terrible 2 from you to use with my kid. And I'm like, sure, dude, no problem, you know. And that's always fun, whereas these guys that you've known for 30 years, you know, are at the same place that I am at the same time. It's pretty cool.
Well, where can our viewers where can they find out some more information about your kayaks?
Soulwaterman.com. That's one word, Soulwaterman. That's the best place to start. And otherwise on Facebook. It's impossible to miss me. I'm everywhere all the time.
Well, Corran, I certainly appreciate it. That was a very interesting interview, and man, great to have you on the show, man.
Yeah. Thanks, Corran.
No
Thank you.
problem, guys. It was a pleasure talking to you guys. And if you need anything, just give me a shout.